talk about rare diseases and the science behind them. I'm your host, John, and this is my co-host, Alex.
Before we can talk about rare diseases, we first have to understand the basic building blocks of life, or in other words, DNA. I'm sure you've all heard about DNA. Essentially, it acts as a blueprint for many of the things we produce in our body.
That's right. And certain segments of DNA make up what we call genes. Almost all genes code for these things called proteins, which are large molecules. They're extremely important in the everyday functioning of our body. For example, proteins hold your skin together and help digest the food that you eat, and they do other things too, I guess. So it's actually quite surprising that only 2% of all our DNA actually codes for proteins.
But what about the rest of the DNA?
The rest helps control when and how much of a gene is expressed in a process called transcriptional regulation. Modern research is also going into a lot of the unknown sections of non-coding DNA to find out what their function is. We don't know all the functions of our non-coding DNA, but we have a general idea of what's going on.
So protein synthesis, or when the body makes these essential proteins, happens through a process in which a gene on DNA is copied into segments of things called messenger RNA, or mRNA. And mRNA is similar in structure to DNA. It has like a few changes, but other than that, it's generally just easier to read and contains the information that codes for only one protein. It's kind of like the difference between reading the entire dictionary or just looking up one word.
But how exactly does DNA store its information?
The code of DNA, or the alphabet of DNA, is composed of 4 letters, or 4 molecules. Really, it's adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And these are the molecules that make up the code of DNA. And they're analogous to using letters to make up words in the English language, and that's how we code for proteins.
So using this alphabet, DNA is copied into mRNA, and then mRNA is taken and further made into proteins. It's kind of like using recipes when you're baking. The recipes tell you what ingredients to use and what steps you need to add them in. So in this case, DNA and mRNA would be the recipe, and the food fresh from the oven would be the proteins.
So if DNA and RNA are the recipe, why do we need both?
DNA is found exclusively in the nucleus of a cell, and this is to protect it from the rest of the cell. And it's the primary reason why we need mRNA, which acts as a messenger, as a disposable copy that we can produce proteins from.
So you may have heard the word human genome or genome, maybe on TV in a science show, or your professor said it in class. And this word actually relates to DNA, but what exactly is a genome? Well, a genome is the smallest set of DNA that codes for your entire body. And each cell has this genome in it, and it essentially contains all the information that is required to keep you alive.
And now it's time for Science and Society.
Welcome to Science and Society, the segment of our show where we talk about science and its impact on human life.
Since the genome is so important in our understanding of any living organism, scientists in 1984 decided to sequence the human genome. It's one of the largest collaborative projects in science, and the Human Genome Project has dramatically advanced our understanding of genes and diseases.
Completed in 2003, the project revealed that there are about 20,000 human genes, which is much less than the estimates of 50 to 100,000 that had been made prior. Though the genome has been sequenced, scientists are still working to name each gene and determine its function. This process, once complete, will have huge implications on biomedical science and future research on rare diseases.
Exactly. Imagine if the function of every gene is known. Researchers can easily determine what genetic cause might be underlying someone's disorder, dramatically improving the care and diagnosis for rare disorders as well as common illnesses like cancer.
So you've probably heard that you're half your mom and half your dad, but what does that actually mean? In fact, this whole idea comes from a German scientist named Gregor Mendel, who proved that parental genes are passed on to offspring. This means that you get your genes from your parents, and that's why your traits are similar to theirs.
The traits that are passed down to your parents are actually coming in combinations. You get one half from your mom and the other one from your dad. Traits can be dominant or recessive. This means that if you get a dominant trait from your dad and a recessive one from your mom, the dominant trait will be the one that you express.
Exactly. As an example, if your mom had blue eyes and your dad had brown, you'd most likely have brown eyes because the brown trait is dominant. That's why people say you look like your parents. Your genes are a blend of theirs, so you resemble them in many ways. So every day, our cells are constantly dividing in order to make new cells that keep us alive. And because each cell contains a copy of our DNA, when we make these new cells, we must also replicate the DNA so that it can be found in every cell.
But what happens when this process goes wrong?
While DNA is being copied for replication, it happens thousands and thousands of times a day, and this makes it so that mistakes can occur very easily. Generally, our body has systems in place, checking systems to make sure that the DNA is copied perfectly so that there's no problems. But sometimes, especially when we get older, mistakes can happen that go unchecked, and this can result in cancer or some other types of diseases. And well, cancer is defined as an uncontrolled replication of a mass of cells.
Other times, these mutations occur in reproductive cells, and when this happens, it leads to hereditary mutations. So essentially, hereditary mutations are those that the parents pass on to the children, who end up having these mutated cells in all of their body. And just like we said, there are very many different ways that mutations can occur because there's so much DNA. And so while some of them are more common, other mutations may only occur in a very small part of the population, which leads to what we call rare genetic disorders, because it only affects a small part.
So today we talked a lot about basic genetics and mutations, and now we're finally ready to start looking at rare diseases in our future episodes.
So in future episodes, we're going to be looking further into genetic mutations, explore the different ways in which DNA replication can go wrong, and how this impacts our health. This is exactly why I had to cover the first few basics about DNA, because it's so integral to the role in rare disease development.
So thanks for watching. Join us next time. We'll talk about specific diseases such as Tay-Sachs. You can check out our website in the description below, as well as our Facebook and Twitter. See you next time.
You know, the best resources are web-based. There are a couple of websites that I would advise people to go to, and these are websites that are really advocacy websites, but also information websites.